As I sit here, sipping on my lukewarm coffee, my mind drifts back to the tumultuous years of the early 1970s. It was a time when the United States was grappling with some of its most harrowing experiences in the 20th century. These were years marked by world wars, presidential assassinations, economic turmoil, and intense socio-political unrest. In that turbulent era, the Vietnam War carved its grim distinction, leaving an indelible mark on American consciousness. I vividly recall the year 1971, a year that saw President Nixon in office and the release of the iconic film The Godfather. It was also the year libertarians held their first convention. But for me, 1972 was the year that changed everything. Fresh out of high school, barely 18, I stepped into adulthood with my parents watching proudly. They envisioned a future for me filled with hard work and dedication, but destiny had other plans. I found myself drawn to a cause greater than any personal ambition. In June 1972, with a mix of youthful idealism and a desire to serve, I enlisted in the Army. The intense months that followed at boot camp in Travis County, Texas, were a blur of hand-to-hand combat training, weapons drills, and preparation for what lay ahead. Soon after, I found myself on a plane from San Diego, bound for a land that, until then, had been just a distant, mysterious name in the news: Vietnam. Stories of missing action heroes and prisoners of war in North Vietnam had reached us, tales of men found deep in the jungle, fallen victims to the Viet Cong. Despite the horrors these stories hinted at, my resolve to fight for the freedom of the Vietnamese people didn't waver. I believed I was part of a noble cause, a fight for liberty against tyranny. The journey from San Diego to Vietnam was anything but smooth, with the Pacific storms battering our plane. To pass the time, I struck up conversations with my fellow soldiers. There was Paul from Austin, Texas, a high school dropout who found purpose in the Army, his easygoing nature hiding any deeper worries. Then there was Carson, a unique blend of Vietnamese and Irish heritage, from Stockton, California. Fluent in both Vietnamese and English, thanks to his mother, Carson was the joker of our group, lightening our mood with his quirky humor. As our plane touched down in Saigon, a sense of camaraderie had already bonded us. We had a few days to ourselves before deployment, and I seized the opportunity to explore Saigon. Wandering its vibrant streets, I stumbled upon an old bookstore, a treasure trove of Vietnamese literature. As I browsed, a particular book caught my eye, an old, worn English tome. Flipping it open, I was greeted by an illustration of a fearsome dragon with piercing red eyes. The story within spoke of a jungle-dwelling dragon that preyed upon the unwary, spared only by sacrifice. I chuckled at the tale's absurdity, but as I turned to leave, the shopkeeper's words in clear English echoed ominously. "You better walk with your eyes open in those trees." Little did I know how prophetic those words would be. Leaving the bookstore and its eerie warning behind, I made my way back to the base, the shopkeeper's cryptic words still echoing in my mind. After a few days in Saigon, absorbing the vibrant yet chaotic energy of the city, our mission was laid out before us. As privates, we were to spearhead the search for the Viet Cong, delving into the dense jungles near the north-south Vietnam border. Our primary objective was to locate missing prisoners, a daunting task in the thick, untamed wilderness. Together with about 200 other soldiers, we journeyed in jeeps to our assigned battle zone, straddling the borderlands. The jungle that welcomed us was unnaturally quiet, its stillness broken only by distant bird calls. It was an ancient place, with an air of forgotten secrets and lost eras. As we set up camp under the guidance of Sergeant Rogers, a towering figure of over 250 pounds, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Rogers was a stern but fair leader, treating us more like fellow soldiers than subordinates. Soon, Carson, Paul, and I were tasked with investigating the jungle. Armed and cautious, we ventured into the thick greenery, enveloped by a silence so deep it was almost tangible. The natural beauty of the place was undeniable, and in different circumstances, it could have been a paradise. Hours passed with no sign of the enemy, but as we prepared to head back, Carson's keen eyes spotted something unusual in the distance. A structure, seemingly man-made, resembling a large rock building. Approaching the mysterious edifice, we realized it was an abandoned temple, its ancient walls whispering tales of a bygone era. Our exploration was cut short by distant shouts in Vietnamese and the unmistakable sound of approaching Viet Cong. We hastily retreated to camp, reporting our discovery to our superiors. They dismissed it as one of the many long-forgotten Buddhist temples scattered across the region. Despite their indifference, we couldn't shake off our curiosity about these ancient ruins. The following day, we were once again sent to scout deeper into the jungle. Pushing through the dense foliage, we stumbled upon an encampment of the enemy, a few hundred Viet Cong soldiers, unsettlingly close to our position. We observed them silently, noting their numbers and activities without being detected. After documenting our findings, we reported back to Sergeant Rogers, detailing the enemy's strength and proximity. Our routine scouting mission took an unexpected turn when we noticed a lone Viet Cong soldier stepping away for a smoke. Seizing the opportunity, Carson devised a plan to capture him for interrogation. We encircled the soldier stealthily, our hearts pounding as the distance between us closed. I could see the orange glow of his cigarette in the dim light. With a pistol and cloth in hand, I crept up behind him, swiftly subduing him before he could call for help. His muffled cries were lost in the thick jungle as we prepared to extract any information we could about the missing soldiers. Carson and Paul pinned the Vietnamese soldier down as his screams echoed through the dense jungle. Carson, with a knife pressed against the soldier's neck, warned him in Vietnamese of dire consequences if he made another sound. The threat worked. The man fell silent, his body trembling with fear. Carson interrogated him, their conversation a rapid exchange in Vietnamese. After several minutes, Carson, looking disgusted, let the man go and knocked him unconscious with his gun. We needed to leave quickly, without leaving a trace. As we trekked back to camp, I couldn't help but ask Carson about the soldier's revelations. Carson, still seething with anger, revealed that the man had denied the existence of any prisoner of war camps nearby. Furthermore, he claimed that their own men had been vanishing, suspecting an American POW camp. This was baffling. Our unit hadn't reported any disappearances, nor had we captured enemy soldiers. Returning to camp, we relayed this information to Sergeant Rogers. His reaction was puzzling, a mix of confusion and barely concealed fury. He abruptly ordered us back to our quarters, his face a mask of rage. Back in our bunk, Paul and Carson speculated about Rogers' unusual behavior. Carson then shared something he hadn't told Rogers. The captured soldier had also mentioned a serpent-like creature linked to the disappearances. Deciding Rogers wouldn't believe such a tale, we resolved to keep this information to ourselves. In the following days, we prepared for an offensive towards the North Vietnamese camp we had spotted earlier. Rogers briefed us on the mission, his demeanor unusually tense. Armed and ready, we ventured again into the heart of the jungle. Our first task was to clear a path. Carson and I were assigned to flamethrowers, while Paul cleared debris. Hours passed as we worked through the dense foliage, eventually setting up camp deep within the forest. But our plans were interrupted by an unexpected Vietnamese counterattack. The ensuing firefight was intense and relentless. Bullets whizzed by, and the air was filled with the sound of gunfire and shouts. Paul, an unexpected marksman, took down several enemies, while I managed to barely hold my own. Rogers called for heavier weaponry as the enemy kept surging forward. The battle raged into the night, both sides locked in a desperate struggle. The Vietnamese, though less well-armed, were relentless. We responded with all our furor, a mix of fear and adrenaline fueling our efforts. Cheers erupted from our side as we pushed back the enemy, But the respite was short-lived. More Viet Cong soldiers emerged from the shadows of the trees, their numbers seemingly endless. The chaos of battle intensified around us. The ground became littered with bodies, their faces frozen in an eerie, lifeless stare. Snipers hidden in the trees began picking off our men, and the situation rapidly deteriorated. Paul got hit in the leg, and Sergeant Rogers, amidst the turmoil, ordered a retreat. The battlefield was a blur of movement as we struggled to fall back, the enemy closing in. With Paul injured, I hoisted him onto my shoulder, and Carson provided cover fire. We were nearly encircled, the situation growing more desperate by the second. In a split-second decision, I suggested we head to the temple for refuge, hoping it would offer a temporary safe haven. The temple, bathed in moonlight, stood eerily silent, its ancient walls overgrown with vegetation. As we approached, I could hear the enemy's shouts. They caught sight of us entering the temple, but to my surprise, they seemed terrified. Confused and shouting in Vietnamese, they quickly retreated. I didn't understand why until I heard them yell, "Con Rong, Con Rong." Unsure of what it meant, but sensing an opportunity, I fired a few shots to ensure they kept their distance. Inside, Carson attended to Paul's wound, which thankfully wasn't life-threatening. I took the chance to explore our ancient sanctuary. The temple was adorned with statues and paintings, many depicting dragons. These images were haunting, a yellow dragon with red eyes and a menacing expression, as if ready to pounce on its prey. Venturing deeper, the light from my lighter illuminated more dragon depictions, each more intricate and ominous than the last. Carson joined me, and we studied the artwork in awe. He explained that dragons were significant in Vietnamese culture, often seen as benevolent, rain-bringing deities in agriculture. But this dragon was different. It was depicted as a malevolent, vicious creature, unlike the protective dragons of local folklore. As we delved into these legends, a scream from Paul snapped us back to reality. Rushing to his side, we saw a horrifying sight outside the temple. A monstrous creature, with the body of a worm and the head of a lion, was attacking a man. It was a gruesome scene. The beast was devouring the man, tearing flesh and tissue with an insatiable ferocity. The creature then turned to us, its massive wings unfurling, its red eyes glowing menacingly in the dark. Fear gripped us as we stared at this nightmarish figure, a living embodiment of the sinister legends we had just witnessed in the temple's ancient art. The monstrous creature, after a chilling encounter, took flight, leaving us in a state of shock and disbelief. It hovered near the temple entrance, as if searching for more prey to satiate its hunger. Desperate for safety, we retreated deeper into the temple, finding refuge in a large atrium. The creature's unnerving snarls and screeches echoed through the ancient walls as it clawed and banged, trying to reach us. We stayed huddled in the atrium, hours passing in tense silence, broken only by the occasional distant bird call. In an effort to illuminate our surroundings, I used my lighter to start a small fire with scraps of cloth and leaves. As the flickering light cast shadows, a silhouette emerged, startling me. It was a statue, ornately adorned with gold and rubies, depicting the same dragon. Carson, studying the statue, concluded that those who built this temple both feared and worshipped this creature. Curiosity drew us deeper into the atrium, where we discovered a passage leading to a room with a high ceiling, perhaps large enough to accommodate the dragon itself. This room was adorned with countless dragon images and a large altar, seemingly designed for human sacrifices. Golden daggers scattered around confirmed this macabre purpose. Suddenly, a hiss from above sent shivers down my spine. The dragon descended, its claws aimed directly at me. I felt its sharp talons rip into my leg, the pain searing. I could smell the foul stench of rotting flesh from its mouth as it lunged at me. In a panic, I retreated toward the atrium, but not before the creature's claws sank deep into my skin. I screamed in agony, drawing my revolver and firing at its arm. The beast recoiled with a pained shriek, giving me a chance to escape. I crawled back to the atrium, where Carson and Paul were waiting. As dawn approached, we prepared to leave the temple, carrying the injured Paul between us. Exiting into the daylight, we stumbled upon a horrific scene. A group of Vietnamese soldiers, their bodies mangled beyond recognition. It was clear no human could have inflicted such damage. Among the grotesque tableau, we found a few supplies: water, painkillers, and a dying soldier. This soldier, in his last moments, uttered the word "con wrong" repeatedly. Carson conversed with him, learning of a winged serpent that had ambushed their unit. The soldier spoke of the creature's resilience and the devastating attack that left him mortally wounded. His consciousness faded in and out until shock overtook him, his final words still echoing, "Con wrong, con wrong." The reality of what we were facing hit me hard. I felt a wave of nausea, my body rejecting the horror of it all. All I wanted was to leave this nightmare behind and return home. Draining my half-full canteen, I tried to compose myself. We continued our search through the wreckage, looking for anything useful. The sight of the carnage and the dying soldier's words haunted us as we prepared to leave this cursed place behind, the memory of the terrifying creature looming over us like a dark shadow. Leaving the ghastly scene behind, we trudged towards the American camp, each step weighed down by exhaustion and horror. Paul's condition was deteriorating, his leg showing alarming signs of infection. After what felt like an endless march, we finally spotted an American jeep in the distance, a glimmer of hope in the midst of despair. As we neared the camp, it became apparent that it was virtually abandoned. Jeeps and tents were left in disarray, and everything bore the marks of a recent fire. The scene was hauntingly silent, devoid of the usual bustle of military life. Our search for survivors led us to a grim discovery. A handful of Americans, including Rogers, were hastily loading a jeep. Rogers, his face etched with fear, was herding a mix of injured and healthy survivors onto the vehicle. We shouted to get his attention and hurriedly placed Paul in the jeep, noticing the injured and scared expressions of the men inside. Rogers, visibly shaken, revealed the unthinkable. Our entire battalion was gone, save for us. He recounted the harrowing events following our retreat. The camp had been attacked by the same monstrous creature, its big red eyes and bloodied teeth, a nightmare come to life. It had rampaged through the camp, incinerating and tearing men apart, leaving no one in its path unscathed. In a desperate bid for survival, Rogers and a few others had hidden in a nearby cave until the beast departed. As the jeep carried us away from the horrors of the jungle, we shared our own encounters with the creature. The stories poured out, each more chilling than the last, as we drove to a small town outside Saigon, finally reaching an American military post. That marked the end of my harrowing journey. We were all relieved of duty due to PTSD and flown back to the United States, where we were placed in the care of the VA's mental health division. The doctors insisted that the dragon was merely a hallucination, a byproduct of war-induced stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. Our paths diverged after that. Paul, who had his leg amputated, succumbed to his traumas and passed away in a mental health clinic. Rogers, haunted by unceasing headaches and visions of red eyes, ended his own life years later. Carson, on the other hand, pursued studies in Eastern religious studies and remained obsessed with uncovering the truth about the dragon. The fate of the other men, those who perished at the claws of that beast, remains unknown to me. The VA doctors continue to attribute my nightmares to stress, but I am certain of what I saw. That creature, with its razor-sharp teeth and blood-red eyes, still haunts my dreams, a lurking predator waiting in the shadows. The fear of it, ever present and real, stalks me, a constant reminder of the horrors we faced in that distant land.